This is a Federal News Network podcast.
As with every year, hundreds of amendments are introduced to both the Senate and House version of the National Defense Authorization Act. Obviously, not all of them make it, but they are debated nonetheless. To find out what those amendments those on the industry side are keyed in on, we welcome David Berteau, President and CEO of the Professional Services Council. David, always a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here, Eric.
All right. So we've got a list of amendments here, that you've kind of described as some you are feeling good about and some you aren't feeling good about. We've had a lot of rough news over the past couple of weeks. Let's start with the positive stuff. What is it about a few of the amendments that you are liking what you see?
Well, let me see. Actually, I've got my amendments in the wrong order here. I have the negative on top, so let me move those quickly to the bottom here. You can tell where my mind is focused. So
absolutely. That's your job, right?
Exactly. We represent, obviously, government contractors at the Professional Services Council, and we do spend a lot of our time, Eric, on fending off or improving bad ideas that are moving to legislation. We don't often brag about our success rate there because all that really does is highlight those issues and gives them new life sometimes. But I appreciate the opportunity to go through some of these. So in particular, as we are looking at, and some of these are provisions that are actually already in the Senate bill. So they'll be, if and when this bill comes to the floor, I think, you had your conversation with Lloyd Dugan broadcast yesterday, and he was reflecting, we don't know when or if the bill will come to the floor. Nonetheless, we do know that it will eventually become legislation. So what's in it actually matters quite a bit. So if we look at some of these positive provisions, the first one is one that I think tackles a really tough issue, and that is, what kind of defense industry do we need for a real war with economic mobilization across the economy? We've already seen from just the demands of providing munitions and support to Ukraine that it has drawn down our stocks, and the rate to replenish those stocks under current production is way longer than the time to expend those munitions and fire them out of a howitzer somewhere, right? And so I think it's a very, very legitimate question. What this legislation would do, though, is actually put mostly the requirements on DOD to figure out what they need and how much industry can provide it based upon today. And if industry can't meet those needs, what would it take? The intriguing thing about it, though, is it doesn't leave this entirely up to DOD. This is Section 850 of the current Senate bill, and it requires DOD to consult with industry. It doesn't specify who. It says they'll sign, agreements with representatives of industry to do that. Obviously, from a trade association's point of view, we'd like to see industry represented in part through the trade association so that you can get a much broader spectrum of companies come into play. A very worthy goal. Whether or not this actually achieves it or not remains to be seen. Of course, the timelines are remarkably short, as Congress always expects the answer sooner than they can ask the question. So that's the first one, and we kind of like that one because it's got good intent and it sets us off in the right direction.
Gotcha. All right. And so the another one that you all have highlighted as one of your favorites is the tracking of awards made through other transaction authority, which has grown exponentially over the years because it seems as if procurement and acquisition executives just seem to like how it works. Is that the idea behind this, is that there is so much growth in there that folks got to know exactly how much money is being used through there?
I think that's probably part of the motivation and incentive. One of the things that from our perspective, our member companies find attractive here is, the basic reason why other transactions authority and agreements under the authority are so popular is because they allow the government, both DOD and there are many other agencies that have OTA authority in one shape or another. It allows the government to essentially bypass the constraints and strictures of the standard federal acquisition regulation. And one of our views at PSC from the beginning of the creation of this authority, and to some degree it goes all the way back to the Space Act of the 1950s, but in recent years it's really grown. Our concern has been, if you can fix this for some, why not fix it for all? And so what it does is, in many ways, it becomes like a little steam release valve to take the pressure off of fixing the acquisition system for everybody. Nonetheless, it's here to stay and it's being used. And so we think having a better reporting system of what's being used and what are the results that you get out of this, particularly for DOD, where they have the authority, first of all, to use OTA for prototypes. And then if the prototype is successful within a short period of time, about 5 years, then they have the authority to actually move forward into production. This is non-competitive. Whether you're getting the best deal or not, I don't know. What you're getting is the faster deal. and a faster deal is not always the better deal. So we're looking forward to this kind of report just to give us greater visibility into the system.
And another one seems to carve out another chunk of exclusivity for some defense contractors without naming exactly who would have access to that. It would establish a pilot program for access to shared classified commercial infrastructure. What does that mean? And is that some sort of open source idea to speed things up for bigger contracts? What's the idea behind that, you think?
Well, the infrastructure referred to here is most likely secure classified information facilities, which we would call SCIFs, right? One of the things that we learned when COVID hit is we don't have enough SCIF space. Particularly, we didn't have enough SCIF space across the federal government for everybody to sit with enough distance between them, right? And so we ended up with a great deal of challenges, both in staffing this. And as you can imagine, it's pretty hard to work remotely when you have to be on a classified network, unless your home happens to have one in it, which is unlikely. Right? So we learned early on that not only did we not have enough, it was overutilized or underutilized, depending on where. So this makes a step in the right direction by opening it up, particularly for small businesses, which can't really afford to invest in their own facility, but can't do the work unless they have access to a facility. We would love to see it actually go beyond a pilot, but because we think the need is clearly there and the opportunity is clearly there. But I think that those who would say, I don't really want anybody in my SCIF but me, then this opens up the idea of let's demonstrate the value and show that, in fact, the negative impact is minimized or could be done away with altogether. So we endorse this pilot. You know, there's three kinds of pilots, Eric, in the federal government. One is a pilot that lets you punt so you don't have to deal with the issue. The second is a pilot that will verify the outcome you know is already going to occur. The third is actually an open-ended pilot that will collect the information, evaluate it, analyze it, and produce some results. We're hoping that this will be that third one that is not a predetermined outcome, because we think the outcome will show that it's a good idea to share SCIF space across the federal government.
We're speaking with David Berteau, President and CEO of the Professional Services Council. All right, we got through the good stuff. Let's go to the bad stuff that you all are not happy with. One of them is, it would be a requirement of contractors to provide yet more reasonable access to repair materials. This is obviously aimed at a certain amount of bigger contractors that would have to give up some of what they might consider to be trade secrets. What are you all not liking about this?
Well, you got to start out. It's really always an interesting thing. What exactly is the problem that the government's trying to solve, right? So sometimes when we have a provision that we're not crazy about, rather than say just do away with it, we say, what would you need to do to actually make this worthwhile? So the problem apparently the DOD is trying to solve here is it's expensive and time consuming to repair and maintain weapon systems. Right. And I think there's plenty of evidence of that. There's a tautology that's been around for decades, and there's data to support it, that 70% or more of the cost of any weapon system is after it's fielded. And yet all of the focus of cost and schedule and performance is at the front end in that 30% or less that's during the development and design and production. And so I think by focusing on the aftermarket, if you will, on how do you keep things going for a long time, then this is a legitimate objective to cover this. Unfortunately, the solution is a back-end solution, which is just give us all your information so we can repair it ourselves. There's a lot of demonstrated evidence that A, that doesn't save you time, and B, it doesn't save you money. Among the most expensive people in the government are fully burdened, which we don't do fully burdened costs of uniformed personnel out in the field doing this. They generally cost 2 to 3 times as much as any contractors would cost if you look at the fully burdened costs that would be consistent with what a contractor has to keep track of. And so I think the real question here is, how do you do a better job? Our solution to that, by the way, is pretty simple. Start awarding contracts based on lower life cycle cost instead of pure production costs. But that's a long ways away from reality. So we'll be wrestling with this. You're absolutely right. Companies will not want to give up their proprietary information, their business competitive information, and particularly give it free to the government, because we've got plenty of evidence that you can't trust the government to keep track of that and to not let it out or use it to get a competitor against you. So we'll continue working with the Congress on this one.
Yeah, and in another area of the defense industry in particular that members of Congress are probably interested in is the amount of mergers and acquisitions on the defense industrial base, which a report would have to be generated from this. There have been a lot of these, and there's been a lot of talk about the lack of diversity and competition within the defense industrial base. What is your side, or what is your the PSC's take on that?
Well, it's become almost a truism in the government today and in the Defense Department in particular that there's the following relationship between things. Number one is we've way fewer prime contractors, particularly in the major weapons system area, than we had in the past.